It was a calm Saturday afternoon, and I was finally able to enjoy some peace and quiet. The house was serene, with no distractions or noise. Just me, my thoughts, and a moment to unwind. My friend and I had spent the morning together, but he had left a few hours earlier to run errands with his dad. I didn't think twice when they said they would be gone for a while. After all, I felt completely at ease in their home, having visited many times before. It had become like a second home to me. I had just made myself comfortable in my friend's room, scrolling through my phone when I heard a soft knock at the door. It wasn't loud or rushed, just gentle enough to make me wonder if I had imagined it. I figured it was probably the wind or a neighbor, so I ignored it. But then, a moment later, the door creaked open, and to my surprise, standing there was my friend's mom. Let me pause here to give you some context. She's always been incredibly warm and inviting, the kind of mom who makes you feel at home the instant you walk through the door. But today, something felt different. Her usual friendly smile was replaced with a more serious, almost hesitant expression. She entered the room and softly closed the door behind her. My stomach did a little flip. Not from fear, but because I couldn't quite understand what was happening. Her unexpected presence, combined with the stillness of the moment, made everything feel unusually intense. She sat down at the edge of the bed, clearly preparing to say something important. I noticed she kept fidgeting with her hands as if she were deciding how to begin. "Hey," she finally spoke, her voice quiet. "I just wanted to talk to you about something. Something I think you should know." And with those words, the entire atmosphere in the room changed. I didn't know what direction this conversation was going, but I could tell it was going to be something memorable. I sat still, trying to remain calm, but my mind was racing with questions. What could she possibly want to talk about? She looked at me for a moment, almost as if weighing whether or not she should continue. Her hesitation only made me more nervous. I wasn't sure if I should say something or just wait for her to speak. Sensing it was best to remain quiet, I decided not to interrupt. She sighed softly, almost as though she was preparing herself. "I know this might seem a little strange," she began, "but I've noticed some things recently about you and how things are when you're here." Her voice was steady, but there was an underlying seriousness that made my chest tighten. What was she talking about? What had I done? 100 thoughts ran through my head, but none of them made any sense. She paused again, carefully selecting her words. "You're a good kid," she said, her tone softening a little. "I've always thought that about you. You're polite, respectful. You're like family to us." She gave me a faint smile, but there was still something unspoken in her expression, as if she was leading up to something bigger, something she hadn't quite said yet. I tried to respond, but the words got stuck in my throat. Thank you," I managed, my voice awkward. "I really appreciate that." She nodded but didn't take her eyes off me. "That's why I think it's important to talk to you about this," she said, her voice dropping a little. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but I need to know if you've noticed anything unusual." The word unusual made my heart skip a beat. What did that mean? My mind began racing as I tried to figure out what she could be referring to. But before I could ask, she leaned in a bit closer and asked something that completely stunned me. "Have you ever felt like someone's been watching you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. My stomach dropped. Watching me? The question was so unexpected, so out of the blue that I didn't know how to respond. I blinked at her, trying to process what she was saying, but all I could manage was a nervous laugh. No, not really," I said, though my voice didn't sound convincing, even to me. "Why, what do you mean?" She leaned back, watching me closely, as if trying to figure out if I was being truthful. "It's probably nothing," she said after a long pause, but the way she said it made it clear she didn't believe her own words. "I've just noticed a few things. Small things. Doors left open, lights on when no one's in the room." She hesitated, her gaze shifting toward the window. "The other night, I thought I saw someone outside near the house." The mention of someone outside sent a cold shiver down my spine. I turned to glance at the window, suddenly hyper-aware of how quiet the room had become. My mind raced back to all the times I'd stayed here, all the little sounds I had dismissed as the house settling or the wind. Was it possible I had missed something? Or maybe, just maybe, I hadn't wanted to admit it, because I didn't want to be scared. I didn't want to scare you, she continued, her voice breaking the silence. But I thought if you've seen or heard anything, you'd tell me, right? I nodded slowly, but my mind was in turmoil. What was she trying to say? Was she just being overly cautious, or was there really something going on? Her words hung in the air, heavier than I had expected. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her it was nothing and that maybe she was just overthinking it. But sitting there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I haven't noticed anything, I said carefully, though my own thoughts were starting to question that. Hadn't I heard strange sounds before? Hadn't I caught glimpses of shadows shifting in the corners of my vision, only to convince myself it was just my imagination? She studied my face for a moment, her expression unreadable. Maybe I'm just being paranoid, she said finally, forcing a faint smile. It's probably nothing. But the way she said it, it seemed more like she was trying to convince herself than me. Then, almost as if on cue, there was a noise from the hallway, soft but distinct. We both froze. Did you hear that? She whispered. My heart raced in my chest as I nodded. It wasn't loud, just a faint creak, like someone stepping on the old wooden floors. But in the stillness of the house, it was enough to send chills down my arms. Stay here, she said suddenly, standing up. Her voice was firm, though I could tell she was hiding her own anxiety. Wait, I blurted out, instinctively grabbing her wrist. What if it's something serious? My voice trembled, and I hated how obvious it was that I was scared. She hesitated, then gently pulled her arm free. It's probably nothing, she repeated, more for her own benefit than mine. But as she moved toward the door, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread settling in my chest. The door creaked open, and she peered out into the hallway. I held my breath, every nerve in my body on edge. For a moment, there was nothing. Silence. Then she stepped out, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and the growing certainty that something wasn't right. I sat there, staring at the door, every second stretched on, feeling like an eternity. The house was unnaturally quiet now, as if the usual hum of life had been swallowed up. My ears strained to catch any sound, her voice, her footsteps, anything. But the hallway remained still. I wanted to get up, to follow her, but something kept me frozen in place. Was it fear? Or was it that nagging feeling that there was something I wasn't being told? Then, just as I started to convince myself everything was fine, the tension in the air only seemed to grow stronger. I heard a faint sound, a dull thud followed by a soft scraping noise. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make my heart race. I immediately stood up, feeling tense, my mind swirling with thoughts. Mrs. Carter? I called out, my voice barely a whisper. There was no answer. I took a step towards the door, each movement feeling more weighty than the last. As I reached the doorway, I paused, gripping the frame as if it were the only thing keeping me grounded. The hallway stretched before me, dim and unsettlingly still, but something didn't feel right. At the far end, near the staircase, I thought I saw a fleeting shadow, as if someone had moved just out of view. My stomach tightened. Mrs. Carter? I called again, this time louder, but still no response. I took a shaky step into the hallway, every instinct telling me to retreat and stay in the room. But something was pulling me forward. A combination of concern and an uneasy feeling that I had to find out what was happening. As I neared the top of the stairs, I felt it. A slight draft coming from below. That's when I saw the front door, which had been closed earlier, now slightly ajar. My heart raced in my chest as I moved closer, glancing nervously around. The house felt unnervingly quiet and empty. Just as I reached the top step, a sudden noise behind me made me spin around, only to find myself face to face with someone I never expected to see. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Standing just a few feet away was my friend. His face pale, his expression unreadable, and his sudden presence hit me like a shockwave. What are you doing here? I blurted out, my voice trembling. I thought you were with your dad. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder, seemingly checking to see if anyone was nearby. "I need you to trust me," he whispered urgently. "But you have to leave right now." "What are you talking about?" I whispered back, my confusion and fear spiraling. "Where's your mom? What's going on?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice even further. "I can't explain everything right now, but there's someone in the house. They've been here before and we don't know who they are or what they want." My stomach churned at his words. The strange noises, the shadow I had seen, the door left open. It all came rushing back, and suddenly it all made sense in the worst way possible. Just then, we both heard it. A sharp creak from the hallway behind me. I spun quickly, my heart pounding, but there was nothing. When I looked back at my friend, his expression had darkened. "Go," he said firmly, his voice breaking slightly. "I'll take care of it." Before I could protest, he gently pushed me toward the stairs. My feet moved on instinct, even as my mind screamed for me to stay and help. I reached the bottom of the stairs and glanced back one last time, and that's when I saw it, just barely visible over his shoulder. In the dim light was the outline of someone standing at the end of the hallway. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Then the door slammed shut between us. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, staring at the door that had just closed. My heart raced, and my legs felt like they weighed a ton. Part of me wanted to rush back up and force the door open, but fear kept me rooted to the spot. Who was that figure in the hallway, and why hadn't my friend followed me down? My mind was swirling with questions, each one more terrifying than the last. Then I heard shouting from upstairs. My friend's voice, firm and commanding, followed by a loud crash that shook the walls. I panicked, unsure of what to do. My instincts screamed at me to get help, but my body wouldn't move. Seconds felt like hours until finally the front door burst open and his dad rushed in, a flashlight in hand. "What's going on?" he demanded, his eyes darting between me and the staircase. "There's someone upstairs," I managed to stammer, my voice cracking. Without a moment's hesitation, he dashed up the stairs, calling out for his wife and son. I stayed rooted to the spot, every nerve in my body trembling as more sounds echoed from above. Footsteps, shouting, and another loud thud. Then silence. Minutes later, his dad returned, his face tight but composed. Behind him were my friend and his mom, both looking shaken but unharmed. "It's okay," his dad said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "We called the police. Whoever it was is gone now." I exhaled shakily, a wave of relief washing over me, but I couldn't shake the unease in my chest as we waited for the authorities. My friend finally explained. For weeks, strange things had been happening in their house. Objects moving, doors left open, noises at odd hours. They had brushed it off at first, but recently his mom had seen someone lurking near the property late at night. They thought it was just paranoia. Until now. The police arrived and swept the house, confirming that the intruder had fled. They found evidence. Muddy footprints near the back door and a broken lock on a window upstairs, but no clear answers about who the person was or why they were there. As I left their house that night, I couldn't stop thinking about how close we had come to something far worse. It was terrifying, yes, but it also reminded me how fragile our sense of safety can be. Sometimes the scariest things aren't imagined. They're right in front of us, hiding in the shadows.